Oh, what's up, everybody? Welcome to System Crafters Live. I don't know what I just did. Oh, is my microphone peaking? Okay, seems good now. There we go. Now I'm on the right screen. What's up, everybody? I'm David Wilson. Welcome to System Crafters Live. This is a weekly live stream where we get together as a community and talk about whatever interesting topic I've come up with for the day, and this week is no exception. Let me just make sure everything is running smoothly here for a second. Okay, looks good. So today I want to talk a little bit about a more philosophical, conceptual topic. But before that, we'll get into our general updates and whatnot before we jump into it. So I would like to say hello to some people who have joined so far. CTOID, T, Minas Mezar, Rob, Eric. Nice to see you all. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it. Menacing Mecca. Nice to see you. So let's see. Updates. This week, I actually spent a lot of time trying to use God mode and meow, like we talked about on the stream last week. It was interesting. God mode is pretty cool. I think it's a good option if you want like a really quick way to just get, faster key bindings. With the built-in Emacs vanilla key bindings. But the problem is, I'll explain this more in a video later, but the problem is that Emacs key bindings are not really like a modal editing situation where it's very convenient to do various different editing operations like on, strings or sentences or paragraphs or blocks, whatever. I mean, there's obviously key bindings for that in Emacs, but God mode doesn't necessarily make that part easier. So I spent some time with that. I could see myself actually being able to build a configuration on that, but I don't know that I will. I also spent a lot of time with Meow. Meow is kind of like it's like an alternate reality version of evil mode, and it's really hard to remember the right keys to press at any given moment. I had a lot of trouble trying to get my head wrapped around that one. It's interesting. I've been using it. I've been getting better at it, but I just don't know yet. I don't know if I can get over my deeply ingrained evil mode or Vim modal editing key bindings out of my head to be able to use it effectively. But I'm going to spend some more time with them and see how it goes, because I do see that there's benefits of being aware of the built-in Emacs key bindings in both God mode and Meow. Sort of set things up in a way where you're still able to use and somewhat you kind of have to use built-in Emacs key bindings. So it's good to know these things. Evil mode, you're sort of in a completely different universe. So I don't know. It's interesting, but yeah. We'll see how it goes. I'm definitely gonna make a video about God mode soon. I've already got like half of a video script written for that, and then Meow I'll definitely cover in a video too. But we just need to spend a little bit more time with it and see if I can gain some more mastery. So people are assuming I'm getting pizza right now. No, not today. I don't know why anybody's ringing the doorbell at the moment. Hopefully it's not the tax man. Anyway, hello to Emmanuel, Duncan, Jeff, Hassan, Case, Hiasmus Opticus, okay, Purple G, Technomag, let's see, Fade, Arnaud. All right, thanks you all for being here, appreciate it. No calzone. Yeah, I don't know if it's going to be a calzone. I mean, they have something called Piner Lee here, which is, it's not really like a calzone, I guess. What is a calzone, after all? The deep questions of life. So yeah, modal editing modes, I've been having some fun with that, but in this stream, I'm going to be using evil mode because I don't want to go crazy. So you're not going to see me struggling with my keyboard today, which is good. Also, I just want to remind you that there's a couple ways to support the channel right now. One is through the website Ko-fi, ko-fi.com/systemcrafters. It's a place where you can do like one-time donations. There's possibility of doing like memberships or like sponsorships, like Patreon or GitHub sponsors, but I haven't really set that up yet. But if you want an easy way to support the channel, you can go there and buy me a coffee. And I think there's a little notification thing up there that might ping if you do that. Also, the book Mastering Emacs is a great way to get a more deep understanding of Emacs. If you've ever seen the blog Mastering Emacs, which you probably have if you've been searching around for Emacs content on the internet, this is like a deeper version of all the content on that website. And it's a very great reference for learning more about Emacs. If you use the affiliate link here, you will be supporting the channel because a portion of the proceeds will go to that. So that'll be great if you haven't checked out Mastering Emacs yet. And I'm thinking about like rearranging some of the stuff I'm doing as far as like, sponsorships and whatnot soon, because there's a lot of stuff that's sort of been lagging behind in System Crafters world. I'm trying to get that caught up now. So hopefully I'll have some better things to announce on that front soon. All right. So CTOID says, what's this window manager? This is Sway. All right, so one other thing I want to mention, a new System Crafters website is coming. Oh, I have a wrong link here because that's the current website. So the System Crafters website has been kind of minimal and not really useful for a long time. It's basically just been a place for me to dump show notes from videos and live streams, and I haven't really been doing a good job keeping that up to date. But what I realized recently is that making videos is great for showing how to do things, like to show someone what it looks like whenever you're doing something, like maybe installing a particular Emacs package and using it, or how to, basically configure Emacs from scratch, which I'm surprising that a lot of people were able to do based on the videos or the video streams that I did a long time ago. But it's not the best way to give like a long-term reference about how to do something. So what I would really like to do is kind of flip the model of what I've been doing so far and focus more on writing content on the website that actually is more comprehensive end to end, and it can serve more as a resource for people who want to learn how to customize Emacs or install geeks or a lot of the other things that we talk about on this channel. And then the videos that I make would be kind of supplementary content in the sense that I would tell you the same things I would normally tell you in a video, but really the goal is to go read the content on the website that explains all this stuff. The show notes will play less of a role. I mean, they'll still be there, but they'll play less of a role because really that's not the best version of the written instruction for how to do something. So I want to put a lot more time and effort into building out like full guides for how to do certain things, like, building an Emacs configuration from scratch, like having a full written guide for that, or, installing geeks and setting up a basic desktop environment, or this other thing I've been talking about lately, like building a modern desktop environment with Wayland and Sway. So all this stuff I really want to spend time writing on the website and then making videos from that. And I've been working on kind of a refresh of the website. It looks kind of similar to how it did before, but I'm going to organize the information a lot differently. And I've got a little bit of a sneak peek of it up right now. If you go to new.systemcrafters.net, I mean, the body of the site looks basically the same, but the header at least has a logo now. It looks more like the theme of the site overall, and it's going to have a bit better organization, I think. So, if you go to it doesn't work right now because not all the stuff's set up yet, but if you were to go to the guide section, it would give you sort of like the end-to-end guides and point to the various different video series that we've been making so far. Also a news section, which we haven't had so far, to have like an RSS feed so that you can subscribe to that in L-Feed or Newsboat or whatever feed reader you use to get sort of, whatever the latest video releases are or that kind of thing. So you don't have to necessarily go to these other websites to follow what we're doing. You can see everything just through the RSS feed. So I think that it's going to be a much better way to organize all the information that I want to provide to you all. And then it's also possible to still contribute to the website. I might we have a wiki also where people have been contributing. I might sort of merge the two because I feel like two different places to have information is not as great. So I don't know. I'm thinking about just having one site that has everything. So we'll see how that pans out. But I'm pretty happy with how all the stuff is going so far with that. Also have the little icon down here that tells you that this is being hosted on Codeberg. So I'm sort of in the process of moving more and more of the things that I do over to Codeberg because I quite like it as a collaboration website. So you can actually go to, let's see, the repository for this, which is codeberg.org/systemcrafters/systemcrafters-site. And this is being hosted via Codeberg pages, which is something I'll maybe make a video about at some point. Yeah, it's a great place. And I highly recommend people to at least try it out if you haven't tried it yet. And, you know, it could do a lot of the things that you probably have been using, excuse me, GitHub for in the past. Jeff says, will crafted Emacs get moved over there? I'm not sure. Maybe, but it's possible. We should discuss it, I think. Hi, Steven. Nice to see you. Amalvadia says, does Codeberg offer functionality that GitHub doesn't? No, I would say it's the other way around. I mean, there's plenty of things that GitHub does that Codeberg doesn't, but I think that the core functionality that I really want from a collaboration website that I want to put all my stuff on is here. You can do things like, you know, issues and pull requests, sort of a more familiar flow for people who might want to contribute who aren't familiar with, you know, email-based contribution workflows. Also has a sort of like a pages thing where you can do your website effectively through a Git repository on Codeberg. Also, it has continuous integration services, ci.codeberg.org/systemcrafters. I think that works. Doesn't have any projects yet. That's not true. Anyway, it does have CI. It's sort of like GitHub Actions, but I actually kind of like the way it works better because it's just based on Docker images. So you can just pull any Docker image off of Docker Hub and use that to run your automation. So super easy. Like if you were to look at this woodpecker.yaml file, this is basically all that I do to publish this site. I just use this Silex Emacs CI image, which has Emacs 28 in it. And then I run my publish script, and then I switch to another branch, the pages branch, and sort of just push all that stuff up. And then it goes live. So this is actually a simpler flow than I think what I have on the GitHub repository for the same thing. So pretty cool. Nusfun S, let's see, Snuffson, I'm guessing your name is because it's probably written backwards. What about translations? Maybe. I don't know. I mean, if people wanted to do community authored translations, that'd be pretty awesome. But I mean, I probably can't do any translating because I'm not a very good speaker of anything other than English, and I'm not even that good at that. So what can I say? Let me check the stuff here. Case says RSS. We stand in an RSS feed. Yeah, it's desperately needed for the website. That's for sure. Emmanuel says, what's the update on your book? The work on all of that stuff is definitely going to be going in conjunction with the website. So a lot of that stuff is going to be sort of done at the same time. I'm very motivated to just sit down and start writing out a bunch of different things at the same time. Not really thinking of it so much as a book, but as just like a resource. Think of all the things that I wanted to like explain to someone, try to set up all the outline of it, start writing out the various different things, and just sort of filling things in. The way that my brain works is I don't think very linearly. I think more like scattershot, like whatever is at the top of my mind is what I'm going to focus on. So maybe it's better if I'm not thinking, okay, I'm working on this book this week. No, I'm just working on writing whatever piece is necessary for these various different guides that I'm going to have on the website. And then that content will probably become a book, or the guide will be turned into a guide on a particular topic will be turned into a book. Not sure exactly how I want to do that yet, but I'm going to experiment with some stuff and see. I don't know. I'm just excited to have like actual high quality written content on the website because I feel like it's not lacking. There's plenty of great Emacs content on the internet, and I guess there's geeks content also, but I feel like having like a really comprehensive and well organized resource that is intended to teach you something end to end. I don't know if there's something like that right now. So aside from the manuals, obviously. So that's what I want to do. Minas Mazar says, is the System Crafters logo under the Creative Commons license? It is not at the moment. If people are interested in that, I would certainly like to hear opinions on it. Hello to Debrik. Let's see. Purple G says, I enjoy a healthy mix of videos and written content. Written content is great for reference. Yeah, that's the thing. I would like to focus on written content as the place where I point people from videos. Like I even want to have like a fact section where there's like specific question and answers for certain things. And then in a video, I don't have to waste time explaining to you how to set up the Melpa package repo to install a package. I can just say, click this link and go to this description of how to set up Melpa, and then it'll just point them back to a place on the website where I've already got something written for that. So I think it will make the videos a lot more streamlined to not have to repeat myself in a lot of things, because I tend to be very in-depth and comprehensive in videos, and I think that ends up making the videos longer when they don't really need to be. So I want to avoid that. Bio1 says, hi, Systems Crafter. You once told me hacking isn't about hacking banks, but I'm working on something that could be called hack mode. It seems like I'm in the minority in cybersec, have done a CTF from org mode. That's interesting. All right. Cool. So that's it for the website information. Once I finally get everything sort of migrated, get everything reorganized, get all the show notes from the previous streams and video series on the site and put into a better place, I'm going to make this be like the new official site, and I'll do an announcement for that. And then the RSS will definitely be set up under this news section so that you can put it in your feed reader, and then hopefully there'll be news updates every week, at least to talk about whatever the stream is for Fridays, and then maybe whatever other updates that are happening on the site or videos that go out. So you'll see updates there. I also want to get a mailing list set up, but I've been sort of struggling with which service to use for that, because I don't want to use one of the scammy, spammy mailing lists. I'd rather use something a little bit more aligned with what we prefer. So I'm still looking into that. That would be another way to sort of be notified of things. All right. So let's jump into the real topic of the day, the principles of system crafting. So I don't know, maybe the title of this video, this stream sounds a little bit too definitive, as if I've got it all figured out, but I don't really have it all figured out. Really, this is an opportunity for us to discuss together as a community, as people who watch this channel, what the principles of system crafting would be, this sort of idea of system crafting. Now, system crafting is like a term that I came up with, but people have been doing this kind of thing forever. But in terms of like what I would describe to someone on like the System Crafter's website, or videos that I make, or the things that we discuss in the community, what are the principles that we collectively would like to follow, and why, and sort of what is the rationale behind all of it. So I want to just kind of come up with a good list of what the principles are, not necessarily to just like have these literally be on the website, but more as a way to inspire content and direction, and also the perspective used to describe how to do things, and also inspire people to try to do things that they really haven't done before, because maybe there's good reasons to, and they just haven't really considered it yet. So I've already got a set of things that I've thought of, but I would certainly love to hear your suggestions for additional items to add to this list. So we'll go through the things that I have here, and then if you if you think of anything else, let me know. We'll add it at the end, and we'll discuss it more. Hey, Gun. Omoveja says, I was expecting a Windows 11 install today. Boo. Yeah, I was joking around in the Matrix chat, or the IRC chat, because Case asked me what the stream was going to be today, and I said that I'm going to be installing Windows 11, which is obviously not true. So just a little in joke for the people who are there in the Matrix chat. So if you're not there yet, you should go to let's see, what is it, systemcrafters.chat, and get the instructions on how to get into that IRC Matrix bridge, so you can join us there. And I mentioned last week that I'm planning to shut down the System Crafters Discord. I am still planning to do that. I haven't made a full like real announcement for it yet, and I haven't even gone into the Discord yet to mention it. I am going to do it. So it just I haven't gotten back around to it yet. But the news section of the new website will be a place where I'll be discussing that. So hopefully that will be up soon, so that you can actually subscribe to the RSS feed. Okay. David Thompson says, hey, Dave, Windows 11 has work groups, I hear. Yes, even Windows 3.11 had it. Judy Dev says, same for Flux Harmonic. Yeah, I mean, Flux Harmonic has kind of been in limbo for a while. Actually, this weekend, is the next Ludum Dare that I wanted to have done, but I'm not really ready for right now. Plus, my wife is like almost ready to give birth to my second child, so it's not really good time to be like trying to do a weekend long game development competition. So yeah. Anyway, point being, Flux Harmonic, I will actually do a refresh on that website as well, because eventually I'll get back to making videos there, but System Crafters has more of my attention at the moment. Okay, so the principles of system crafting. Number one, prefer free software. This is not really a surprise. I mean, this is pretty obvious, but I've been thinking about it more and more recently for various reasons. One of them being, which seems to be coming up more and more these days, is sort of like the planned obsolescence of devices and software. So I have a couple of Android phones that are a bit older. I also have a couple of MacBooks that are a bit older. And in both cases, those machines do not get the latest updates, the OS upgrades for software. It actually was a problem for me with an old MacBook because I was trying to set it up for a project to help someone with something. And I couldn't actually install the latest version of Xcode to get the latest, GCC version that comes with that or whatever. And to use the latest dev tools that I need to actually do the thing I needed to do. So this sort of planned obsolescence of software based on, driven by either devices or just by the support patterns of companies, it's kind of harmful if you are dependent on the software or the hardware that you have. Like if you don't want to have to buy a new laptop every 2 or 3 years, then you're eventually going to have to face the fact that you're not going to get any software updates and you're going to get left behind in terms of what is happening in the software world. So it's something that's been more and more apparent to me recently that, using free software is great from the perspective that you can modify and extend it, but also it's always there. It's not really preventing you from using newer versions. You can always upgrade it to a newer version of the Linux kernel. You can always upgrade to a newer version of whatever other software you're using that is free software. Even just like plain open source software can be done like this in many cases or most cases. But I think that the way that things are going makes it more and more clear that if you really want to craft a system that you can depend on long term and really kind of become one with the system, like if you get really deep into Emacs customization and you get so familiar with the way that you personally have it set up that you can't possibly use someone else's Emacs configuration, like this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. You become really dependent on the way that you set it up and the way that you understand your system. You can only really do that and have any hope to depend on that system long term if it's free software. So like the number one top line, most important thing is definitely to prefer free software. That doesn't mean never use proprietary software, because unfortunately, you often have to use proprietary software for a variety of reasons, like your job or your school that you go to, or just like maybe you buy like a camera and the only way to interact with that camera is the software that's on Windows or Mac OS. I mean, like sometimes you just don't have a choice. But in the cases where you're trying to make something yourself, you're trying to build a system yourself, using free software, as a corollary, using GNU Linux or using, let's say, FreeBSD or any of the other Unix-based systems that are built on free software or open source software, you're in a much better position for the ability to use your hardware and your software long-term and to depend on it. So super important, I think. And I'm also super appreciative of all the work that's been done up until now for all the software that I use. Like since I switched to GNU Geeks in 2019, I think. I mean, I've been using Linux and Emacs longer than that, but since I switched to GNU Geeks, the actual setup that I have here has not changed drastically. Like some of the programs that I've been using have changed. I've switched things out. I was using EXWM for a long time, then other random window managers, and now I'm kind of settled on using Wayland with Sway. Maybe I'll try other Wayland window managers at some point, but the fact that all this stuff exists and I know I can depend on it and it's going to be high quality software that's going to be around for the long term makes me feel confident that what I do is not going to be lost. And with Geeks, at least I have the ability to replicate the same environment anywhere I want it to go, like on any other machine, potentially even mobile phones in the near future. small embedded systems, servers, etc. So it's super important if you really get into this idea of system crafting, or just really kind of building your own computing workflow from these kind of tools, that you have control over the tools, and they're made for you, for your own freedom of use. So let me see if anybody else is mentioning anything in the chat here. Hello to Camelo. Let's see. My Gun says my 24-year-old T400 runs like a charm with an SSD and Arch. Yeah, that's a pretty interesting thing. Like the older ThinkPad laptops that you can kind of replace the hardware in and still get pretty good mileage out of. I mean, they're not going to be as fast or as efficient as any of the modern CPU architectures, but the fact that you still have the ability to, put Libre boot on them, or have full control over the system and use it for a long time, I mean, that's pretty nice. And Gun says, however, it can't run Windows 11. What a pity. Jeff says that's a feature. Yes, that is kind of a feature, right? Judy Dev says, yes, MacBook Pro running Arch got me through most of my bachelor's and my master's degrees. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was using Gentoo and Ubuntu while I was doing undergrad and master's. So definitely, Linux has powered my education life and my personal life. Fade says Plan 9 for everybody. I need to try Plan 9 at some point. Bio1 says for Nix, there's a project called Nix on Droid. That sounds cool. Yeah, Geeks is not fully on Android or Android style devices yet. There's been a lot of work done, I think. There's something called Replicant, I believe. And I think someone's trying to get Geeks running on that. I could be saying complete nonsense, but I was at the Geeks birthday event last year and someone was talking about that. Let's see. All right. So, prefer free software. I mean, there's not really that's not very controversial. I don't think any of these points are going to be controversial, but I wanted to sort of codify them as best we can. So, things like GNU Emacs, GNU Geeks, Linux. What are some other examples of, really core free software programs that we use? I mean, obviously like Core Utils, GCC. There's plenty of other things. We don't have to list them all, but etc. I mean, like these are the things that you could build your entire computing life on, which I think is great. For Free says Replicant uses Geeks as part of its build system. That's about it. Okay, that might be what I heard about. That's right. Judy says clarification, including permissive licenses. Wow, what did I just do? That was great. Let's see. Permissive open source licenses like MIT, BSD, etc. are also okay. LibreOffice, Firefox, yeah, things like that for sure. Definitely browsers. I would love to have a browser that is a bit more simple. Firefox is pretty heavy duty. I'm kind of curious about how this Ladybird browser that's being developed by the Serenity OS crew is going to go, because it's like a clean room. Well, not really clean room, but it's a from scratch browser implementation. Let's see, Ladybird browser. Archived. Must have moved. Where did they go? Okay, there we go. Anyway, Ladybird is like a browser being written from scratch that doesn't work just in Serenity. It also works across platforms. So anyway, point being, I would like to have a sort of a more streamlined browser that actually does support modern web standards. Like, you can't really say that WebKit GTK supports modern web standards greatly. It does, but it's not as good as other browsers. And also, like, there's a NetSurf, which is pretty cool, but it really doesn't support stuff. I think, does it support JavaScript? Okay, it has JavaScript support, but it's not super robust. But, anything like that would also be really useful. Amalveja says, did you give up on Vim B Qt browser? No, actually, I do use Qt browser. I used it more reliably when I was using EXWM, but I haven't just gotten it into my workflow yet for Sway. I have to kind of change the configuration a little bit. Case says Serenity OS seems like such a vibe. Yeah, Serenity is a cool project. I'm kind of jealous of how cool that project is. Fellow worker John says, I love Qt Browser, but I've been finding a lot of memory leaks recently. I don't have the knowledge to help. Yeah, well, you know, it's a solid browser, but I haven't really used it enough recently to see if there's been new bad mal improvements. Is that a word? Get involved, David. I don't have time for that, man. I don't have time for anything. So CTID says, how about Nixt? Yeah, every time I try Nixt, I have trouble with it. I want Nixt to work out because I think it's a great idea. And it's kind of the hackable browser that I wish to have. But still not... I don't know. They've got their version 3 release kind of gradually getting there. I keep seeing release candidates get pushed out. So whenever 3.0 officially gets released, we'll do a stream or a video talking about it because I would like to try it again, hopefully in a more working state. But the last time we tried it on a stream a few weeks ago with version 2, it worked, but it was kind of hard to figure out how to extend it. I don't know if they've improved that at all, but... Aldo says, have you tried EAF browser? I have not tried that at all, actually, because I was using EXWM in the past and I was under the impression it didn't work very well, but probably, well, I wonder if it works in the PGTK version of Emacs. If it does, I might try it. If it doesn't, then I can't use it. Case says, the best config format is one I'm making called FFF. I'm very curious to hear about that. Chiasmus Optica says, good suggestion for one of the principles, as few configuration formats as possible, as much as possible in Lisp scheme to reduce complexity. That's a good point. All right, so let me move on to the next thing. All right, so we got done with prefer free software. Next is prefer plain text for configuration and files. And files is kind of vague, but I'll tell you more about what I mean. So one thing that has always bugged me when using not only proprietary programs, but even free software programs is that whenever a program allows you to configure it using a user interface, and then it stores the configuration in a format that is completely impenetrable and not very easy to put in source control, either because it's binary or because it's in some weird textual format that's not actually meant to be read by a human being. One good example of that is for a free software program is OBS Studio, which I'm using for streaming right now. It uses JSON, which is a JavaScript-like data format, I guess you could call it, but it minifies the JSON file to the extent that it's like a single line and there's no spaces between any of the characters. So it's not really something that a person is going to be able to go tweak by hand or even really store in source control effectively, because source control is generally looking at things on a line-by-line basis, right? I mean, maybe you can do runs in a single line, but my experience so far has been it's not very easy to source control a file like that, and it's not easy for a human to edit it. So if you have a program that uses a binary format, then you're definitely out of luck, because, I mean, you could check that in, but you can't reason about it. You can't look at it. You can't look at a diff in a program like Git when you check it into a repository and see what changed over time. Having that ability to audit the changes that you made to your configuration over time is super important, because you may not realize why something broke until you go back and look at a commit you made and see like specifically which lines you changed. Or maybe you make a commit and then later you want to go back to that previous state. You don't want to have to roll back your actual repository to get to that state. You just want to go back and like sort of just make a couple small tweaks to your configuration file. And if you can't easily see what those things are, or if you can't easily edit the file, then you're kind of out of luck. So definitely prefer programs that use plain text for configuration. And I would also like be more specific on that. Plain human readable and editable text. So Emacs is a great example of that, because the configuration is text files. Even things like your shell, like Bash or Z shell. I'm trying to think of a program that's not code that for their configuration. What would be a good example? Like Polybar. Polybar is a program that has a kind of like an INI style configuration format that's not code. And you can go edit that by hand. And in fact, you're intended to go edit it by hand to set up your configuration. So being able to read your configuration file, edit it by hand, check it in the source control, see diffs on the content of that over time is super important. But to me, the ideal is that your configuration is code, because if your configuration is code, it gives you much more power in your ability to extend the behavior of the program. So obviously Emacs is an example of that. GNU Geeks is an example of that because your entire system configuration is written in Scheme. Even Qt Browser is an example of that because most of the configuration is written in Python. So that's a good browser you could use, that you can use code and human editable configuration to configure it. So really important, I think, for the configuration side of things. If you're trying to craft a system and you want to keep that configuration running long term, then you need to be able to check it into source control, because source control like Git, Mercurial, etc., is the best way to sort of lock in the changes that you're making and also see the history of the changes you made, so you can easily get back to your previous version of it if you need to, or maybe have a branch to try out something else on the side, whatever you want to do. So super, super important. Also, I would say a corollary is you should use plain text for your personal files, your personal information, formats like org mode, markdown, even plain text files, etc. So any program that can use a plain text format for the things that it needs to do. Another good example of that is Ledger /H Ledger. I don't know if you've heard about Ledger, but that's a pretty awesome program. In fact, Ledger was written by John Weagley of Emacs fame. So this is sort of like the original program that did this, but it's basically an accounting program. It's a double entry bookkeeping program that uses text files to do all of your bookkeeping. And you can basically put all your expenses, all your assets, all your everything in here and generate reports based on those text files that have all this information. So if you're doing your personal finances or you're running a small business, you can just use text files. You can check that stuff into a Git repository, and then you have all your financial information at hand. I've used this in the past. It works pretty well. In fact, there's a program called H Ledger, which is written by someone else, which is a bit more robust, but uses the same basic format. And you can do quite a lot with it, quite a lot. You can even track like your stock investments if you do that sort of thing. Lots of different things you can do. If you do like, let's say currency arbitrage, you can see the value of your different currencies over time. It's crazy stuff you can do with that. But point being, this is a really interesting application of using a plain text format, human readable and editable format that you can check in the source control, but it does something actually useful. There's programs that can process this information and do things for you with it. So instead of using something like, let's say, QuickBooks or even GNU Cache not bad. It's a great program. But if you want something that's more sort of hacker, crafter friendly, something like Ledger or H Ledger is going to be a lot better for that. So if you can put more of your life, more of the things that you want to do, more of the things that you write, like even your scheduling or your tasks with org mode, etc., the more that you can put into plain text files, the easier it's going to be for you to use those things long term, because you're not going to have this format that's sort of changing out from under you, or some kind of opaque binary blob that you can't really use in another program. So maybe if you wanted to take the data from a program that you use, let's say you use QuickBooks, it might not be very easy to query that information that's inside of QuickBooks to do your own kind of calculations or automations on it. But if you have a plain text format like with Ledger or H Ledger, you could very easily write a script with Bash or with Emacs Lisp or with Guile Scheme or whatever to do extra processing or automated entry adding to your Ledger files. You could do the same thing for your personal schedule or your to-do lists with the things that I mentioned before, Bash, etc., to add new items to it, or to do automatic like archiving of tasks or anything. You can do anything you want because the format is open to you to do whatever you want with, and you can easily understand it. So Super important, I think, for any program that you choose is to make sure that you prefer ones that use plain text for configuration and for your personal data files, because that will give you much more power and freedom in how you are able to use them to help you, rather than you sort of being a slave to whatever program you happen to choose, and then you can't get out of it because you're dependent on the format they have. All right, let's check the chat. Hello to Ashraz. For Free says, what do you think of org mode not really being standardized at all? It really bugs me that this is not portable for that reason. Someone has been working on an org mode specification. There's an org syntax document, but someone else has been working on a real org spec. Is this one? No. Someone actually has something for this. And it's not this. I don't know where it is, but if someone has it, they can mention it in the chat. But yeah, I think that people have realized the need for having like a formal specification for the org mode syntax, or at least a subset of that, so that it's easier for other applications to be written. Like for instance, mobile apps on your phone that can read org mode files. There are a few, but the question is, do they all speak the same language really? I guess they would have to, but it's harder if you don't have like a real formal specification. Let's see. Case says XML is Bay. I don't know. Gun says XML JSON for boomers. That is true. That is true. Someone else asked an interesting question before. Where was it? Theopeklu says, what do you think about the CPU architecture? Stay on x86 or move to something newer and more open? That's a great question. Let me add this down at the bottom. Processor arc. We'll talk about that a bit later. Scanning the chat. Judy Dev says, I think getting off of x86 is less of an immediate concern. ARM devices are slowly showing up. RISC-V will take quite a bit until we can see it's even feasible. Yeah. Menacing Mecha says, you could probably have some kind of setup with Git hooks to minify and unminify the JSON, but probably real brittle and way more hassles than it's worth. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, you could do it, but not ideal. I really wish that OBS was a little bit more friendly in that regard. It used to be. They didn't start minifying the JSON until more recently, probably the last year or so. But I don't know. It's such a fantastic program that I can live with it. Thomas says, IntelliJ uses XML, but they don't ensure a stable sorting on set-like collections, which leads to unnecessary Git diffs. I hate that so much whenever that happens. Drashal says, are you still using Sway? Yes, I'm using it right now. Fellow worker John says, there is org down, which attempts to formalize a subset of the org mode syntax. Org down. I think that's what I'm thinking of. A new lightweight. Yeah, okay, Carl Voigt. Is this Carl's project? It might be. I'll put that in the show notes just so people have it. Okay. You're not that late, Ashraz. Don't worry about it. Let's see. Thomas says, Plan 9 has some nice text format, which allowed nested structured data too. That sounds cool. Case says, Ledger is too powerful. And Eric says, Ledger is excellent. I've been using it for years for both personal and work. Dev Technico says, Ledger has a text user interface and web interface too. Yeah, that's a good point, actually. I forgot to mention that. So with Ledger, you can run a web interface locally so that you can do sort of graphical editing of or even entry of your transactions and whatnot. So if you don't want to have to go use a text editor for that purpose, then you can go to the graphical thing. However, there are modes for Emacs, for Ledger and Ledger, that make it a lot easier to do new entries because it can complete the name of your accounts and various different things that you would have recurring. So you could do like code completion or completions, let's say, for the names of things that are already in your Ledger files. So that's super easy or super helpful. I keep saying super. Sorry about that. Kay says, honestly, I might quit using Sway. Things like switch to the last focus window and ask me what to mark this window as are too complicated. I don't have those problems because the way that I use Sway is super boneheaded basic, but that's the way I like it. Fellow worker John says, whoa, where did it go? Has anyone tried using SES spreadsheets in Emacs? It's pretty wild, but I find it very hard to move quickly. I don't know what that is. Eric says there's an Emacs mode for Ledger and an org Babel interface. Yeah, the org Babel interface is quite interesting, actually, because it allows you to put your Ledger transactions inside of blocks in an org mode document. I actually did that for doing taxes one year, and it was pretty useful, actually. Pretty nice. I keep wanting to go back and like dive into Ledger more because I got to get a handle on my personal like finances and like small business stuff. I just haven't gotten back to it yet, but eventually I want to do a video series or guide or something about text or plain text accounting because I think it's super interesting. Super, once again. Kay says GNU Cache is scriptable in Guile. Yeah, that is pretty cool, actually. Edge Crusher says there's an open source Pokemon battle simulator called Pokemon Showdown, which has a human readable plain text format for team building and importing, exporting team details. Cool. Okay, org down. Thank you. Thank you for, eventually he'll catch it. Yes, I did eventually. I have to get back to looking at the chat history. Gunn says, org mode is going to become ISO standard to supersede docx. That would be pretty good, actually, because docx is just horrifying, in my opinion. XML is just Lisp with strange parentheses, says Ashraz. It's a little bit worse than that. But yes, I see what you're saying. Minas Mazer says, I'm just installing Geeks for the first time. Hope it goes well. Good luck to you. Okay, I'm almost caught up on chat. Fade says, buy hardware from vendors that work with the devs of free operating systems. Yes. And Fade says, AMD greater than NVIDIA. I agree with that. I don't think AMD is perfect, but they're definitely more interested in providing open source drivers for their GPUs, which I think is good. Judy says there is some trivia to XML and Lisp scheme. SGML had an XSLT-like system called DSSSL, which was scheme. That's impenetrable set of acronyms there. DevTechnica says, I love this stream. I've been looking for some Ledger videos for so long. I wrote a parser for a subset of Ledger format using the non-parser combinator library in Rust. That's cool. Kay says, you don't try to switch between two windows? I do, but I use tabs for that in Sway. So I use tabs for my display here. So I use Super H and L to switch back and forth, or even like, I think I had super tabs set up to that at some point, but yeah, if I have multiple windows open, I just have it set up so there's this in tab full screen mode effectively in the workspace, and that works well for me. Amelia Sue says, also remember to save all your pics and stuff with the date format where the year is first in month and day. It saves tons of problems. Yes, I do love that format. And let's see, let me write that down so that people can see what we're talking about. YYYYMMDD, this format, date format. It's nice to be able to write regular expressions on this so that you can say, I want to find all files that start with 2023-04, right? So it's easy to filter down to a specific date range. The denote note-taking package by Protocilla Stavru sets up its files that way. Also, org-rome does it too, but it doesn't really make as much of a deal about it. But denote sort of builds its whole system on that, which I think is nice. I want to make some content on that because I think that there's an interesting usage pattern of denote that can leverage its file naming scheme to do some cool stuff. So that's another thing I'm sort of working on in the background a little bit. Anyway. CTOID says, how is Geeks support for AMD hardware? There's drivers for stuff in the non-Geeks repo, but not in the main Geeks repo. Menacing Mecha says, Ledger is real nice for small business taxes. Tried to PTA for more general personal use, but found it too much of an awkward hassle. I agree with that. Yeah, usually for business expenses, if you're like a creative type who isn't doing a lot of transactions, it's much better. Like it's easier to use a plain text accounting system for that kind of account or accounting. But if for your personal life, if you're like doing small transactions with a credit card or debit card every day, you've got hundreds of them, then you don't want to go put those all in by hand. So you have to have some way to import them. And some banks are better than others about giving you like CSV files you can use for imports. All right. Ashra says, I have some regards about the preferred text-centric interfaces part. Jack Rusher had some good points from his Stop Writing Dead Programs talk at Strange Loop 2022. Tell me more about that, Ashraz. I started watching that talk, but I didn't actually get to that point, I suppose. Gunn says, pronounce Dissel. I don't know which word we're referring to. Did I say something like that before? I don't know. Theopeckley says, controversial opinion, but Intel Iris Xe is pretty cool if you want to play some not so demanding games. Well, the thing is, the Intel hardware in laptops is really nice if you can tolerate having to use proprietary drivers and firmwares. Like I use all modern ThinkPads for most of the stuff that I do, and when you have the full Linux kernel, things just work in many cases. If you are using like a brand new chipset, sometimes it's harder to get things to work. Like I remember when I got my ThinkPad X1 Nano, I couldn't get audio to work for a little while because there was like some new firmware that had to be installed. But then eventually it got propagated back into non-geeks, so I was able to use it. But if you're using like a laptop that's maybe like a year old or so with the Intel chipset, a lot of things just work and it's pretty nice. Fellow worker John says, I've been doing voluntary work with local government. Everything is in doc and docm files. Terrifying. I'm using a tool called UnoConverter to convert them with some eLisp. A lot of the Twitch messages that are a bit longer seem to be getting cut off, so I don't get to see all the text. There's also something called Pandoc that might be useful for doing document conversions between formats. And I think it does support the doc and docx formats, so you might be able to use that too, but I haven't heard the other one you mentioned. Let's see. Thomas says, I find the date format unreadable without the dashes. Well, yeah. Fade says, like Windows 5 as the height of system design? Oh, no. Well, you know, come on. I mean, I think a lot of us here are old enough to have used Windows 95. We got a little bit of nostalgia for Windows 95. I mean, it was kind of cool when it came out. It was different. It looked a lot more modern than Windows 3.1. So having someone make a new OS that uses the Windows 95 style, sure, it seems pretty antiquated at this point. But if you are kind of like a nostalgic computer user from the 90s, then there's some charm to it. I wouldn't use it as a day-to-day operating system, but I don't really think that's the point either. It's sort of just like a toy. It's a toy that has had a lot of engineering work put into it, and it does a lot of things, and it's really cool, but it's still really just a toy. I mean, I don't think people are going to use it. I don't want to insult anybody who works on it by saying that people aren't going to use it for like a real operating system, because maybe someday they will, but at least for now, I don't think that many. I think most people are running it in a VM, and it's just sort of like a curiosity. It's more like a cool project that Andreas Kling is doing and sharing about on the internet. So that part of it is really cool. All right. DSSSSL. Thank you. Dissel. Thank you. All right. We have to call it Dissel because otherwise it looks like a typo, or it looks like that little marker they put on your boarding pass whenever they want to do an intrusive security check on you at the airport. This is some American TSA traveler information. They're going to shut down my stream for mentioning that. Ashra says, in a talk, it starts around 19 minutes in, but essentially it boils down to that even with plain text, you can have a better representation that's easier to grok and looks nicer. It must still be text, though. In a recent podcast, he gave Nicholas Nano Emacs experiments in his paper as a possible improvement in this domain. Okay, cool. Thomas says Win 95 was magical after Win 3.1. Yeah. How old was I at the time? I think I was probably like 12 years old. And when Win 95 came out, it blew my mind. I was so excited about it. Fellow worker John says, "You're free, David. You escaped." No, you never escape. I'm still paying taxes to the United States, so I didn't escape at all. Fade says, "If I was going to work on something that was designed in the 90s, I'd probably focus on Haiku. Haiku is pretty sweet. We should look at it sometime." XFCE Chicago 95 theme. Yeah, you could definitely live in Windows 95 in XFCE if you want to. And also Windows XP. They have that ugly Fisher-Price XP theme. We're getting way off track here. Amalve just says, "I remember when my dad got his first Windows 95 computer, it came with a bunch of CDs, like a couple of 3D games like Dino 3D Adventure and some racing game. That's what Windows 95 reminds me of." Yeah, for sure. Gunn says, "I still miss Clippy." Yeah, that was... At the time, whenever Clippy came out, it was really cool. It was interesting. And also Microsoft Bob, like that's kind of like a new way to think about using computers. It just turns out that it's not very convenient in the end. Ashraz is doing a variation on the old meme. I have to interject for a moment. What you call Windows 95 is not a full operating system. You need a proper instance of GNU Emacs. Only a complete GNU Emacs Win 95 or GNU plus Win 95 setup is functional. Chicago 95 is not a part of the Chicago Manual of Style. No, it is not. All right, let's get back to it. Let me just get these two things. I almost started using Meow key bindings here, so my finger's getting really confused these days. Prefer text-centric interfaces. So going further down the rabbit hole, what I would say is that a text-centric interface, and we did a stream about this in October, and it was only about 25 minutes long because my internet turned off and it didn't work again the rest of the day. And I feel really bad that that stream didn't continue because it was an interesting conversation. We were getting some good stuff out of it. But the sort of thesis of that discussion is that text-centric interfaces are better for people who want to craft their own sort of custom computing experience and workflow. And I don't mean necessarily like terminal apps. I mean things sort of like Emacs, where it's not like really UI heavy. It's more text heavy in the sense that text is used to represent information more than graphics or complex user interfaces. Typically, when you have interfaces like that, where your navigation is based on text or key bindings, then it's a lot easier for you to sort of kind of be one with the system. I feel like in Emacs is like the best environment for being really, really efficient with how everything works. Like getting access to any command through MetaX or being able to set up your custom key bindings any way you want. I mean, key bindings are not necessarily a text-centric interface thing, but I think that it kind of plays a big role in Emacs as far as making the entire environment more efficient. Text-centric also plays nicely with plain text formats, obviously, because org mode is plain text format. We're looking at a plain text format right now with a better, visual representation. And anything that I do, I'm just sort of navigating around in this text file in this text-centric interface. So, in my opinion, having an interface like this is more effective for building your own custom workflow. Even things like using chat applications, mail applications, file browsers like Dired. Having all these things be text means that there's a little bit more flexibility in terms of representing the information and also building a more interactive interface out of that. Now, there's probably some steps further you could go to have a more graphical style interface that's still very navigable, like a text-centric interface. And you could sort of say Emacs is like that, but I think you could go further. However, I don't think there's been a good example of that so far, unless I'm not thinking of it. But I think like keyboard-driven. Well, let's actually expand on this. Keyboard-driven text-centric interfaces. I think that's a better way to describe this. And maybe keyboard-driven is probably the more important thing in the end, now that I'm thinking more about it. So having everything be keyboard driven, you don't have to click around with a mouse. It's easy to search for things in the interface. All of these things make it a lot easier for you to have a very efficient workflow for yourself, especially whenever it's super hackable, like something like Emacs, where you can make your own commands, or you can make your own sort of orchestration of a few different commands that already exist in the program, or maybe you can override certain things in the commands so that you can bind them to keys and then, you know, kind of customize how you use a particular part of the program, that kind of thing. Voltaire's Puppet said, I think I missed what he said, but what is he using for the presentation? This is org mode. And it's a package called org present. I have a video on the channel called The Secrets of My Presentation Style, which goes into depth about all that. Ashrat says, a counterexample, node editors, for example, within game engines, let you see your changes in a complete flow at a glance, where you would need to read several code block definitions within code otherwise. Oh yeah, for sure. For anything that requires like a kind of a graph data representation, a node-based editor is always going to be better. Unless, well, I guess you could say Lisp code is a graph. It's a tree, but it could also be sort of a graph in a way. And if you have a structural editing interface, then you could potentially have it be as convenient as a node-based editor, but it still wouldn't give you the level of, I guess, visualization that a node-based editor would, unless you have like collapsing of the sub-expressions to some degree, so where you can see the overview of everything. Judy says, I think starting with a text representation and breaking out when text doesn't do the job, to Ashrat's point. Yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously at some point you're going to have a graphical application. For many content creation things, you know, you can go pretty far with just text, you know, writing code or a text-based format for describing the content or the edits you want to make to something. But at some point, it's going to be more efficient to just click around with a mouse on a graphical interface, for sure. But I think that you can go pretty far without having to do that. And I think that the type of applications that we are normally faced with go too far in the side of completely clicky user interface driven, and not enough to where it gives you more power as a user. Faye says, raw text means you can calculate on your data in any program, but Emacs is particularly good at it. Yeah. Ashra says, there's also org-roam UI to see the complete network. Doesn't invalidate the pure text variant during input, but for navigation and exploration, seeing the network is a godsend. Yeah, it's definitely nice to be able to see that overview. Having another view of the information when you want it is definitely a good thing. Benoit says, is it referred to as a text user interface? Yeah. Theopecally says, irrelevant question, but why do you have tab bar mode enabled when you already have a bar? That's because I haven't gone back and tweaked my configuration to take that out yet. I've been working on cleaning up my config recently, but I actually haven't synced it to this machine yet. All right. So let's see, what else do I want to say about keyboard-driven text-centric interfaces? So let me, my brain is very confused about which editing mode I'm using right now. One other thing that I wanted to bring up in this this thing when I'm talking about like a nice looking graphical tools, there is a circumstance where sometimes there could be a program that is so nice looking that you just kind of want to use it because it's nice looking. Like let's say, for instance, I can't think of a good example of one right now, but like a media player. So normally I would prefer to use MPV because it's a very simple interface, gets out of your way, pops up when you want it to, you can get out of it easily, and it can be automated pretty well. But there are media players that are quite nice looking and nice to use in GNU Linux. So sometimes, a person might be inclined to use one of those instead of something that would be a little bit more hackable or craftable instead. And I think that's fine. Like I still do sometimes. I don't even know if I have it installed here, but there was another one I was using for a little while. I don't think I have it. Praga is another one I was using at some point in the past. Yeah, I don't think I have it loaded up here. Anyway, sometimes it makes sense to use a graphical program that isn't so efficient or is so keyboard-centric or text-driven. So I don't know. I mean, it's just really just a matter of personal taste in the end. But I think like the core workflow programs that you use all day long, the more that it can be text-driven, the better. I mentioned like mail and social here. I feel like using something like MU4E or not much instead of Emacs for processing your email is so much more efficient than using a program like Outlook or Thunderbird or any other graphical email program. There's probably some good graphical programs that are more efficient than the typical graphical email program, but definitely the fastest I've ever processed email was using MU4E in Emacs, bar none, for sure. Also, using an IRC client that's text-based, especially like one in Emacs like ERC or RCIRC, or an XMPP client for chat like instant messaging, or a Matrix client, etc., like eMint.el. I think there's going to be much better because they give you more power to integrate them with your own overall workflow instead of having to use some separate program that's completely different than everything else you're currently using. So maybe this is something specific to an environment like Emacs where all the functionality sort of gets normalized behind Emacs' own interface and the way that Emacs interface works. But I think generally text-based programs are going to work better for you. Like, let's say you're like a Vim user, hardcore Vim user. Probably you're the type of person who is using GNU Screen or Tmux to multiplex your terminal applications so that you have a more unified interface for all of them. You can switch between them easily, split your windows inside the terminal, etc. So that's even a good example of an environment that you can create with other tools, not Emacs, and get some of the same benefits. Though I would say that Emacs is better from the integration standpoint because everything is sort of together in the same program, same process, and you have integration hooks between all of them. But I digress. Let's see. Antonio says, which bar are you using with Sway? Waybar? Yes, Waybar. I've done very little customization on it. I want to spend a little bit more time with it because I think it has a lot of potential. Let's see. Jean-Baptiste says, something has changed in Treemacs. By default, it's open in home directory rather than the project directory that it used. How do you search for knobs and Emacs packages to change the way you want it? The best way is to go look at the source of the package. And I would use MetaX find library and then type in the name of the package. I have Treemacs. So if you type in Treemacs, then it's going to bring you to the source of the package. Now, maybe you feel a little bit uncomfortable reading Emacs Lisp source, but really this is the best way to do it. The other way to do it would be to, if you have a completion system set up, like let's say Vertigo, if I say Control HV and look at, which is describe variable, and look at Treemacs space hook. Well, they don't have any hooks. Interesting. Well, you can look at variables, you can look at functions in the typical describe commands in Emacs and try to find things there, but certainly looking at the code is going to be your number one way of finding stuff like that. And probably you could quickly find out why it's going to your home directory first too if you start digging into the code. Case says, there's a fallacy with the term text-based, I think. Because it's text doesn't mean that it's not necessarily easy to understand. Sure, that's for sure. There's a lot of bad text-based interfaces. So if there's a better way we can describe that, that would be useful. That's why I say like text-centric instead of text-based. because to me, text-centric means it's not that everything is just literal characters on the screen. I mean, Emacs has like the mode line and other things, even buttons, but your primary way of interacting with information is through text. It's just not necessarily a terminal program, I guess. Gun says, NetHack, breathtaking graphics. Well, NetHack is, it's kind of like looking at the Matrix. If you don't know what you're looking at, it's all gibberish. Amalveja says, honestly, my core programs are just Emacs plus browser. Not sure what else you really need. For me, yeah, it's Emacs and browser. But it's easier for me because I'm a programmer and a writer. So, like I have to use other programs. Like if I want to make music or if I want to edit a video, I can't use Emacs for that, at least not yet. So yeah, I think let's say 80% of my time is definitely in Emacs or a browser. Emmanuel says, guys, what are you using for reading ebooks or PDF for that matter? There must be an Emacs package for that. There's something called nov.el. I think that's for EPUB. But there's also a built-in PDF viewer in Emacs. PDF something. Emacs PDF viewer. PDF tools. I believe it's possible to open a PDF file anyway, but a lot of archived repos today. Anyway. Eric says, the hours wasted on Rogue and NetHack. Yeah, definitely. And Dwarf Fortress. Dwarf Fortress definitely takes the cake as far as these insanely deep text-based games are concerned these days. The Apeckley says, if you're into making games, it can also be done within Emacs, though Godot is better. Yeah, I prefer to just use Emacs and just write code directly. But tools like Godot and Unity, etc., they're pretty nice. Jason Bonifacio says, I'm a non-programmer for a living, so I'm still a slave to Excel. You can do some Excel-like things in org mode, but probably not necessarily to the level of Excel. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Prefer reproducible systems. So this one definitely became more and more relevant to me after I started using GNU Geeks. Previous to using GNU Geeks, I would set up a new Linux system, some distribution like let's say Arch, however you want to call it. Or Fedora or any other whatever I was just trying to use at that given time. And you install all the packages you want to install. You put all your configuration for your programs in your home directory, and maybe you check that stuff into source control. But if you ever have to reinstall the system, you have to remember which packages you installed. You have to remember maybe what changes you made to configuration files in your etc. folder. Especially around like network device configuration or firewalls or anything like that. So the more esoteric parts of your system that you don't really change very often, you forget what you did. And if you ever have to bring up your system again somewhere else on a different machine or the same machine, then you're gonna be in trouble whenever you don't remember what you did before, and you're not gonna remember which files to even look at to copy them over. There's ways to deal with this, but none of them are really easy, I would say. So when I started using GNU Geeks, I realized the power and the value of having a repeatable system configuration, especially to the level of extreme that Geeks or even NixOS allows you to have. In Geeks, you can describe, you're sort of forced to describe your entire system configuration, at least at the system level and even at the sort of home folder level now with Geeks Home in Guile scheme. And every time you run your configuration, it basically creates all the files and puts them on your hard drive and creates symbolic links to those files so that you shouldn't edit them. You should only ever update them using the original configuration that you wrote in Scheme, which means that so long as you have made your configuration work once on a particular machine, you should be able to easily replicate it because it's just the same as making any other update to your configuration. You just reapply the configuration and everything is there. Now, it's not 100% perfect, but I would say it's like 80% perfect because it gives you that ability to check in your entire system configuration into source control and then pull it back down the machine again if you have to wipe your machine for some reason, which isn't really common whenever you have something like Geeks because you don't have like this cruft that builds up over time that gives you problems, or at least not in my experience. Or if you want to put it on another machine, like I have 3 or 4 machines that have the same exact Geeks config on them with the sway and everything. So doing that is much easier with a distribution of GNU Linux like GNU Geeks or NixOS. I don't know if there's other distros like this. There might be varying sort of shades of it. I feel like there's a chance that FreeBSD could actually have some qualities like this under the right circumstances because they make a pretty big deal out of making it easy to configure by editing files in your etc path. And if you put those under source control, then it's possible that you can make a replicable system configuration. There's also the world file, which has the list of all the packages you've installed. So it's easy to back that up in case you want to reapply that same list of files in the future. So some distributions make it easier than others to make a replicable system configuration, but Geeks and NixOS, that's sort of like the whole reason they exist is to make a completely replicable system configuration. So for someone who wants to craft a system configuration and have it be something they can depend on long term, you really need a way to make that system reproducible on other machines or the same machine whenever you want. And you really, there's not so many options for that. I'm certainly curious to hear if other people have heard of maybe newer projects or even tools that could allow you to do this on a non-functional distribution. I mean, there's stuff like Fedora Silverblue, but I don't really know exactly like how all that works. Hey, Felipe, nice to see you. Let me see what's going on in the chat here. Ashra says, and that's how Docker containers got started. You just ship your machine. I guess that's sort of like what Fedora Silverblue probably is doing too, because they're using containers for some of that stuff. Jeff says, on Arch, there's Pacman file, which at least tracks packages installed, however, not configuration. Yeah. I mean, just at least having the list of packages installed is pretty useful, but it doesn't give you the configuration part, which is pretty necessary, I guess, for replicating a system. Jeff says, for configuration, Ansible is a good option. Yeah, definitely Ansible and Chef and Salt Stack. There's a few of those things that existed over time that I don't know how frequently they're used anymore. And I know Ansible still is used. Judy says, FreeBSD is mainly lacking the tooling around automating things. Yeah, at some point I thought about what it would be like to make something Geeks-like for FreeBSD. I quite like FreeBSD. I think it's a cool distribution. It's pretty nice, actually. I might make a series of videos at some point about it just because I think it's interesting in case people want an alternative. I mean, I talk about Geeks all the time, and I'm sure that there's, a decent-sized portion of the people who watch videos on this channel who aren't really that interested in Geeks, so I would like to talk about some alternatives as well, and FreeBSD is definitely one. Also, OpenBSD. OpenBSD is not necessarily as easy to get going with, I think. I could be wrong about that. Bio1 says Home Manager. That's for Nix, right? Let's see. Judy says, I assume because most people who use FreeBSD in such manners automate a ton of servers using Ansible or similar. That could be true. So let's say Ansible. Ashra says, I have a point against tech-centric interfaces. Ashra really wants to ruin our fun today. Some people are actually more or less terrified, anxious of the terminal command line. They get overwhelmed at the amount of commands possible. Well, I mean, those type of people are not coming to this channel, I think. They're not coming to check this stuff out. I don't think a person would be interested in Emacs unless they were willing to tolerate a text-centric interface. Theo Peckley says, did you talk about the recent Geeks blog post about full source Bootstrap? I have not yet. That's a very interesting thing that they've done. I've been following loosely the MES project for a little while because it's really, really cool. Basically, it's a self-hosting minimal scheme implementation plus C compiler implementation, which is used for bootstrapping Geeks, basically. So the idea is that if you start with a very, very small seed binary, which I think they say is like 374 bytes, if I'm not mistaken, which is written all in assembly. You can start with that, and through a series of progressive programs that can be compiled with that very small binary, you can eventually compile the MES scheme/C compiler. And then from there, you can compile Guile scheme, and then you can compile TCC, which is a minimal C compiler. And then from TCC, you can eventually compile like a really old version of GCC. Then you can start compiling newer versions of GCC to the point where you get to like all the modern software and then start compiling all of that. So the point being is that you sort of understand and you can audit the entire chain of the software that you have on your system. So there's no like binary blobs you downloaded from someone that you don't understand. The first binary blob that you get actually is just pure assembly code that you can look at and see because it's very small. And then from that point forward, everything else gets compiled from source. So for people who are very concerned about supply chain attacks or, spyware or, compromised software distributions, etc., then using a software like Geeks, which I think they've merged this into Master now, so it should be like actually happening today. You could do that. If you actually wanted to, you could build your entire Geek system from the Bootstrap seed. It would probably take forever, but it is possible. Most people are using substitutes from the Geek servers, which sort of defeats the purpose. But the idea is that all those binaries should have been built like this, so you can sort of trust them if you get them from the official sources. But anyway, it's pretty cool. I mean, from a technical standpoint, it's really cool. From a practical standpoint, for me, it doesn't really make a huge difference to me because I'm not thinking to that level. I'm not super paranoid about the software that I use. I probably should be to some degree, but I'm not. I'd rather just want things to work. So I don't know. It's cool though. I have a lot of respect for the folks who spent a lot of time and effort on making this happen. I think it can only be a good thing in the long term. Let's see. That was my spiel on Geeks bootstrapping. I haven't tried it yet. I want to take a look at the latest changes in Geeks. I think that maybe we're getting closer to a release. I don't know if core updates has been merged back into master yet, but there's some stuff I've been waiting on in there. Like the version of Sway that I'm using is kind of out of date. And I think it's because all that stuff is kind of held up in core updates right now. Because there's a lot of libraries being updated, probably like glibc, all kinds of stuff that's being updated. So all that kind of has to be dumped at once because you can't do it piecemeal. So we'll see how soon that happens. Judy says, FreeBSD is pretty cool, especially the Poudriere, or however the F you actually say it stuff. Yeah, I haven't seen that one. Familiar Repper says, hi, I want to offer promotion of your channel. Viewers, followers, views, chatbots. The price is lower than any competitor. The quality is guaranteed to be the best. No thanks. Yeah, Vagrant, Gun says. Ah, 357 bytes. That's right. Thanks, Theo Peckley. Amelia Sue says, do you recommend any books? I don't know, man. There's plenty of books that can be recommended. Dave says, core updates was merged recently. That's where the bootstrapping changes came in. Cool. I need to get that stuff pulled in. I'm guessing, excuse me, I'm guessing it was because someone on Mastodon earlier said that they got a huge bump of packages whenever they pulled. So I'm guessing core updates must have been merged. Yeah, I know, Ashraz. It sucks that the restream bot is automatically opt, so anybody who says anything in Twitch chat, it gets through. Kibono says, why do you use Geeks over Nix? Well, one primary reason is because I can write scheme code to configure my system, which 5 years ago, when I had no concept that Geeks existed, I would have thought it was like the coolest thing ever. And I did think it was the coolest thing ever whenever I heard about it in 2019 or 2018 even. But it seems like something that shouldn't exist. Like the fact that there's such a sophisticated distribution of Linux that uses Scheme to configure it and it works and it actually is really good. Yeah, it seems like something that shouldn't exist. Bio1 says, wait, I can run Nix on Geeks? Yes, you can run Nix on Geeks. I use Nix to install things like the .NET framework and newer versions of Node.js. Development tools usually. Not too many things, but I do use Nix on Geeks. Fate says, I'd love to know how long that takes. I'm sure he's referring to the bootstrapping. Yeah, it's probably a long time. You're building all the GCC versions from like 4 up, so it's gonna be a real long time. So Rust has a similar issue in Geeks. If you try to install Rust, then it has to use an older version of Rust and compile that first, and then it has to compile gradually the newer versions of Rust to get to the latest version. And there's a reason for that, and I can't remember what it is, but it is. If you ever have to compile all the Rust tool chain, it takes forever. Judy says, the pain of self-hosted compilers. Yes, that is a problem. While working on Mesh, I was thinking about that a little bit. Like, you know, it's cool to have a self-hosting compiler, but at the same time, it really complicates distribution whenever you have to build it for other systems. So Felipe says, Lisp is the purest form of love. Lisp is great, man. I don't know. We can talk about static typing all day, but I feel like there's just something different. There's just a different feel, a different aesthetic to Lisp. To me, Lisp's, when I look at some scheme code, to me, that is just like the most aesthetically pleasing code in the world. I don't care what other language you want to tell me about. Everything else just looks really ugly to me by comparison. F#, I would say, comes at a close second because of how sort of minimal the syntax is and clean it looks. Definitely better than OCaml. And way better than Haskell, for sure. But Scheme, whew, Scheme is great. Haskell, I don't like Haskell so much. Dave says, Lisp just hits different. That's right. Amalvadia says, I've been struggling to understand what you and others love so much about Lisp. What sets it apart from other languages and what makes people say things like God invented the world in Lisp? I think people are going too far when they say God invented the world in Lisp. But there's something to the idea of homoiconicity and the way that macros work in Lisps, and just sort of the way, the shape of the code in the end. I don't know. The fact that everything's an expression and you can have these nice nested expressions that have a lot of behavior packed into them, and you can understand what it does because of the way that Lisp code is typically grouped in nested forms. And I feel that Scheme is a bit better on that, or at least the way that conventionally Scheme is indented and grouped is a bit better on that. But it's mainly about aesthetics and about the flexibility and pliability of the language, I think. Yes, Dave says Lisp is a programmable programming language. I agree. Other languages like Rust, they have macros, but it doesn't feel the same. C has macros, but that definitely doesn't feel the same. So it's different. It's definitely different. Scheme macros are also in a class of their own. It's pretty interesting, whole macro situation in Scheme. Drew says it's because the Lisp syntax reflects the machine functionality, list hash maps, etc., which is evident because you can program against your program. Yeah. Thomas says Forth is a sweet spot for bootstrapping. Forth is pretty cool. I actually have been coming in contact with some stuff about Forth recently, and I would like to play around with that a little bit. Pretty neat. Minas Mazur says, the most attractive programming language to me is LFE, Lisp-flavored Erlang, a dialect that compiles on Beam. Excuse me. I haven't seen that one yet. I know about Beam and Erlang, but I haven't seen LFE yet. Yopeklu says, yeah, Forth is really suck less. That's an interesting way to look at it. Judy Dev says, C macros are a naming error. C macros are incredibly brittle, but to be honest, they're very useful. Even though they are a foot gun and they're just ready to blow up in your face, I can't imagine writing C without C macros because there's so many things that would be a real pain in the ass to do. Same thing for like compiler defines you can express at the command line, like using -D. Being able to override certain things. Like a lot of times you'll see in a C library that there's like an API signature defined that gets used inside of the API that's exposed by a library or something. And you can override that signature with a define flag so that maybe you want to make it work with a different system or maybe make it work with C++ or something. So I don't know. The flexibility of C is pretty cool, actually. C is, I feel like it gets a bad rap. I mean, obviously there's reasons why C is not the best language in the world, but as far as it being ubiquitous and it being really flexible and powerful, I don't know, C's cool, man. I enjoy writing C. Ashra says, ever used X macros in C? They're great. I've never heard of that. Judy says, I need to look at Scheme again. RR7RS Scheme written in Zig. I almost did that. I almost wrote a Scheme implementation in Zig. I started looking into doing one with Rust also, but I went back to C in the end. Dave says there was a Forth on Wasm talk at FOSDEM, which was a fun watch. I should check that out. All right. Theopeklu says there's also C23, which adds type inference and constant expression to C. See, that's the thing, though. It's interesting to consider adding more modernish features to a language like C, but the reality is the value of C is using like C89 or C99 standards, because you can get super old compilers that can still compile those things to a variety of platforms. So it's almost like if you can write C99 code well, or even C89 code, if you are willing to put up with some lack of features, you can compile code on pretty much anything, even really, really old machines. I'm hesitant to use even like C11 or higher because of the fact that it's not as widely supported, especially in older compilers. So that's just me. I don't know. I think the beauty of C is sort of in that sweet spot of like, C99 era, because it has like the, what do you call it? Struct initializers are easier to use, which is pretty cool. If you've ever heard of a library called Sokol, it's a graphics library in C, and the way it uses initializers is pretty cool. It's actually quite a nice library. I'll pull that up on the screen in case anybody is kind of interested in what I'm talking about. But it's a pretty cool library, the way that you use that one. It's one of those header-only libraries. So anyway, this is some pretty nice-looking C code, in my opinion. And also, a lot of the stuff that you do is stack allocated rather than being malloced on the heap. Okay. Reproducible systems. I've beat on that horse enough. All right, let's go. Prefer open platforms. This should not be too much of a surprise. Closed platforms are a problem because you can't easily integrate them into your workflow or into the tools that you use. So you should definitely use open platforms that have open protocols and APIs that make it easy for you to integrate into whatever you use. So for like communication, Matrix, XMPP, and IRC are excellent because you do have the ability to write whatever client you want to access those things. And also it's easy to automate them. Like for instance, if you want to set up like an alert spot in your Matrix chat for CI runs on some server, or maybe you want it like a running server that you have somewhere to send health information back to a chat. You can do that very easily with these open platforms. It gives you much more freedom to implement whatever you need using the protocol that exists. Also, it makes it easier to have really nice, high-quality clients inside of programs like Emacs. I mean, we have high-quality IRC and Matrix clients. The XMPP/Jabber client in Emacs it works. It's been around for an extremely long time. I don't know that I would call it high quality because it feels kind of janky, but it's possible to use. However, emint.el by Alpha Papa in Emacs for Matrix is pretty good. I like it a lot. I think it's quite nice. I'm very, very encouraged to tell people on this channel, in this community, to use Matrix, because I think it's good enough to do whatever you need to do. Also, IRC has been around forever. There's really solid IRC clients in Emacs. So definitely using these open platforms, you can have the kind of interface you need, both as a user and as maybe a programmer or an automator who wants to interact with these protocols. Email is also an open platform, which you can use, whatever client you want. And there's so many email clients, even for Emacs or just terminal, graphical, whatever. I mean, you can do whatever you want with email. Plus, email is ultimately a text format you can keep on your local machine. So all the emails that you download from your IMAP server to your local machine using like MB Sync or offline IMAP, those are all files that are local that you can sync yourself. You can back them up. You can do whatever you want with them. So it's another case where your personal information is not stuck on someone else's server somewhere that you can't get to. You have it yourself. You can do whatever you want to with it. You can even sync those mails to another email provider if you want to replicate your email somewhere else. So it's a really good example of an open protocol where also the information can be stored locally and backed up and also used offline, which is great. Collaboration platforms. Obviously, Git itself is it's GPL, right? It's free software, but using it requires having some kind of central place usually to collaborate with other people. And there's a number of proprietary options for this, GitHub obviously being the biggest one. Excuse me. But there's some others that are really good, like SourceHut, which we've talked about on the channel before. It's really cool, really unique in how it does collaboration on their site and has a lot of really great features. There's also Codeberg, which I mentioned before, which is kind of like a GitHub-like interface, which is based on Git, if you've ever heard of that software before. But I quite like what they've done so far, and I'm really interested to continue migrating more of my stuff over there, because they're like a nonprofit organization who is kind of like spearheading the development of a fork of Git called ForceJo, which is intended to be kind of a next generation version of that GitHub-like interface, but also with federation. So if you want to have your own instance of ForceJo running on your server, you should be able to federate with Codeberg or other software forges that use the same software. So having these platforms available gives you the ability to host your own if you want to have it on your own server, or maybe if you like have a small team that you want to work together with them on stuff, but you want to have it private, you don't want it on someone else's machine, you can do that. And also just using tools like Git or even Mercurial makes it possible to do collaboration with the files that you have, and you have total control over it. Like with Git, at least, you have the entire repository local on your machine. You can copy it anywhere you want. You can put it anywhere you want. It's really nice because of that. And that's why I personally feel that Git is kind of like the number one option for syncing your plain text files across multiple machines, because you have that ability to have the history of all the changes, plus easy replicability, super surgical tools for editing the history or branching off different changes, or all kinds of stuff that you want to do. So very, very useful to have all of those things. Let me check the chat really quick. Kibonu says GitLab, not a bug. Also, GitLab, GitLab's nice, but I feel like it's too complicated. The interface is really complicated to me, and I don't think that's a good thing. Codeberg or ForgeJoe, the interface is a lot simpler and streamlined and understandable to someone who's used GitHub before, which is probably the majority of people who've contributed to mainstream open source projects. So I think it's good for that reason. Jeff says email is an HTML format. Well, it can be. Drew says, what are some ways to make sure that Emacs packages, like maybe a matrix client, won't somehow conflict with the rest of the Emacs and cause bugs, slowdowns? Making sure they won't conflict? I don't know. That you can't really prevent. You just have to be careful about how you configure it, and if you notice it's doing something you don't like, you might be able to hack it to make it not do that, but it's, more work on your part. Better to file a bug for whoever owns the package, I think. All right. Another thing, build your own tools. Another principle. I think we're sort of like, I'm losing focus on what the overall point here is. We're trying to define principles of what system crafting is. Build your own tools. It doesn't actually mean to write whole programs, especially if you're not actually a programmer. I'm not suggesting like to be a system crafter, quote unquote, which this is just a made up term. We're not saying that, you either are one or you aren't. This is not that kind of gatekeeping thing. We're sort of just saying like, what are the ideal things that you can do to have the best experience if you're trying to do something like this? So what I'm saying for build your own tools is not that you have to write whole programs or learn how to write C or anything crazy like that, but it's really just to learn how to script and write extensions for the things that you use. So by scripting, I mean let me even say bash. Not even bash, bin sh. I think that learning how to write bin sh scripts is very useful because bin sh runs everywhere. It's sort of like the lingua franca of shells. So if you can learn how to do that, even at a very little bit, very intermediate level, then you can do quite a lot of things, because really what you're doing is just, automating the execution of various programs, like the ones that come with core utils or other programs that you install in your system. So writing scripts is important. For me, for updating my system, I don't just use Geek's system or Geek's home. I actually have scripts that wrap those, that add some other flags to them so that I don't have to remember to add them all the time. So even that level, like just writing a script that makes it easier to call a program that you run all the time, that kind of thing is important for system crafting because it makes your workflow more your own and it tailors it to you. So learning how to do shell scripting and building your own scripts for various things, or even learning how to use Emacs Lisp or even Guile Scheme or Python to do scripting of things. Like you can use Emacs Lisp as a scripting language if you want to. It's not the best scripting language, but if you already know how to write Emacs Lisp because you've written your Emacs config or maybe you've written some Emacs packages, you can definitely use Emacs Lisp to script various tasks, which I've done before. I showed it before. I think I have this publish.el file for System Crafter's website, which effectively is a script. I mean, it's Emacs Lisp code, but ultimately I'm using it as a script. I'm running it in CI to generate all the HTML files for my website. So I'm scripting with Emacs Lisp. So if you can learn how to do that, then you can automate certain processes that you would normally do by hand. Like, let's say you want to download your latest transactions CSV file from your bank. Like maybe somehow you can authenticate in a way to get access to that from the command line. You could do that as a script, and you could have it running as a cron job in the background. You could get it, every day at midnight or whatever. I mean, things like this give you a lot of power because you can let the computer do things for you. You don't have to do it yourself anymore. You don't have to go clicking around in all these different places to do things. You can just script it and be done with it. Also, learning Emacs Lisp is super powerful because it allows you to really get the most out of using Emacs. You can write your own packages, or you can at least just write your own functions that automate a lot of the things that you would normally do. I've got so many just random functions around for like dealing with org mode files, or I wrote a whole package that automates my streams and automates OBS. So like just stuff like that, the things that can actually make your life better. You can write Emacs Lisp code to do that. So learning how to do that is what I really mean when I say build your own tools. It's not like writing whole programs. It's learning how to script the stuff you already use so that you can leverage them to get the most value out of them. Ilya says, should we consider LaTeX? I think it's important. Well, LaTeX is pretty cool, but it's pretty complex for most people, I would say. Emmanuel says, I gotta say, I'm surprised to see Python in there. The thing about Python is that I feel that Python has the most libraries of value of any platform. JavaScript is probably a close second, and it may even be fairly close, but Python, like anything you could think of that you would want to do on your computer, there's probably a library in pip for it. So I don't personally use Python for scripting very often. However, recently I did use it for automating video editing. So I've actually got a script now that allows me to edit System Crafter's videos in Python using a library called MoviePy. So I can do cuts in the video, I could put overlay text, fade in, fade out, put background music, everything. I've actually re-edited one of my recent System Crafters videos with Python, no UI at all. Actually, I used mpv.el to play the original file that I recorded in OBS, the video file, and then I used it to insert timestamps into the Python code to do the edits, and then I run the Python script to get the output video file. So the next System Crafters videos you see will not be done with Kdenlive or Blender. It will be done with a Python script. The only reason why I'm using Python is because something like MoviePy does not currently exist for Guile Scheme. Otherwise, I would have written it in Guile Scheme. However, I'll probably write the MoviePy equivalent for Guile Scheme at some point whenever I have time. So Python is very useful. It's just not something that I would reach for first, because I would prefer to write either Lisp scheme or maybe even shell script. But shell script is kind of a pain, so I would rather a Lisp if I had to have my pick. Judy says, I don't think you want to write scripts in C. C, the thing that sucks the most about C is the standard library sucks. It's terrible. Like any other language you go use, you can pretty easily figure out how to like do common things. But in C, no, you're not going to do that. So yeah, C is not good for scripting. You have to basically get like somebody else's third-party thick layer on top of the standard library to do anything of value. So no, C is cool. It's a great language, but no, you're not gonna use that for scripting. Let's see what else we got in the chat. We're about to run out of time here. Okay, host your own services. This is something that I want to start talking more about and also doing more of for myself. I think that people who are into system crafting should be hosting their own services. And when I say that, I mean things like storing your images in the cloud, like giving your images to Google or to any other company that has a program that will sync your image to their cloud platform. I do that because it's the way I've been using my phone up until now, but I'm very, very creeped out by it. And I think that's not a good thing to do. So installing Nextcloud is a good alternative to that. If you host your own Nextcloud instance, you have an app on Android or iOS that allows you to sync your photos to the cloud, and you can own the server. It could be your own home server that you do that with. There's other programs like that too, or other platforms, free and open source software platforms. So things like that. We need to be hosting our own servers so that we have control over our data, and also we're not being unnecessarily, I wouldn't say spied upon, but having models built out of our personal information to do things like advertise things to us, etc. And other things. I don't know, like it's pretty clear that all the big companies, they know your face. They know what you look like. They can identify you in any picture on the internet. So just things like that. I don't know. I'm not a super paranoid person, but if you think about it long enough, it starts to make you feel a little bit creeped out, right? So hosting your own services, try not to depend on proprietary cloud applications. And if you follow the other principles we talked about so far, host your own Git repositories is super easy. You don't even need a UI for that. You can just do it over SSH. And things like your personal notes, or maybe if you're using the Pass program for storing your passwords encrypted, that can be done with a Git repo. Push all those to a server using SSH. Just use your public key for authentication. And there you go. Or if you want to, you can have a UI through cgit or Git or any of the other Git interfaces. But I think that a lot of these things that we depend on, really, we shouldn't be using those big proprietary services. Number one, because they own your data at that point. But number two, because they're not very convenient for you. And they can just decide any day to turn them off. Did you ever use Google's Picasa? I was reminded of Picasa the other day, and I've had photo albums on Picasa. Those are gone now. I mean, like, pictures I took a long time ago, they're gone. If I forgot to back them up, I don't have them anymore. So you can't depend on a company to keep giving you cloud space for the stuff that you have there. So if you really want to keep your stuff long-term and have control over it, you got to have it yourself. Let's see. CTO ID says, didn't that require a static IP? I'm guessing what you're saying is, do you need a static IP to host your own stuff? No, because you can use something called DD Client. DD Client is a command line program, which does something called dynamic DNS. And if you have a domain name provider like Namecheap, which I use, and other domain providers do this, you can have a command line program, DD Client's even in Geeks, so that you can have it periodically send your current DHCP or dynamic IP address for your local machine, your local network, to your DNS provider or your domain provider, so that it keeps that domain up to date. So if you want to have like a subdomain of your personal domain pointing to your local machines or to whatever machine you have, but it doesn't have a static IP, you can use DD Client and dynamic DNS to make that IP available as a subdomain or even as a full domain if you want to. So that is a way that you could point it to your own home machine if you want, which is a little risky. Or you could point it to like a cloud provider or whatever you want to do. Sorry, when I say cloud provider, I mean like Hetzner Cloud or Linode or DigitalOcean or something like that. You have a VM in the cloud or something. But usually with those, you have static IP addresses. Point being, you don't need a static IP to host things yourself from your own home, I guess. But you need to be careful because you don't want to get hacked. Let's see. Tim says, it's so weird to me that the defining feature of Git was decentralization, and the first thing we did was to re-centralize it. Well, the thing is, having Git be decentralized is super convenient, but in reality, you need to have some central place to collaborate. But we should have had a federated way to do that rather than a centralized way to do that. But I don't know. Let's see. What else am I missing here? Ashra says, time for a system crafter standard library.h. Yeah, I don't know if we want to get into that. Let's see. All right. So that's host your own services. And share what you learn. Let's say that would be the last one that I had in mind. So I think that it's nice to share the tools that you make or share the Emacs packages that you make or whatever scripts you make or anything that you do that maybe you want to see if other people want to use them. It's nice to do that, but I think it's even better to share what you learn because the way that you think about things, the way that you process information, the way that you sort of assimilate everything that you learn is going to be different than pretty much everybody else. And if you share what you learn, you might actually connect with someone else who thinks more similarly to you to the way that you do, or maybe you are solving a problem for yourself that someone else might have in the future. So it's important to share what you learned through this whole process. It's sort of what got me started making the videos on this channel and writing stuff about all this and whatnot, is because I was so excited about what I was learning that I wanted to tell somebody about it. So I just started making streams to talk about Emacs and geeks. And I think that especially in a community like the Emacs community, there's been so much value from individuals deciding they wanted to share things they've been learning. Like, let's say Karthik's blog that has so many really excellent blog posts, or Protesilaus or Prot's YouTube channel and website, where he has a lot of really useful stuff that he's both written in terms of packages, but also a lot of educational content. There's just so many sources out there for over years and years and years of people, sharing what they've learned about Emacs, and that's what makes Emacs much more valuable. Having all this knowledge out there, having all these different ideas of how to use Emacs change over time. We sort of adopt different styles of using the program, different packages, learn how to integrate it with different services or things. You being able to share what you learn with other people makes everyone else have a richer experience. So I think it's really important to share what you learn. I mean, it's sort of why we have a community here. We have, our Discord and our Matrix and IRC channels, is for people to sort of chat about the stuff they're learning and, ask questions too, but really it's more about just like share whatever you're excited about. So I think that's, a super important part of this whole experience is like do cool stuff, but then tell other people about it so that they also can be inspired and want to learn more about what they're doing. See you, Amalveja. Thanks so much for being here. Let's see, what else am I missing here? Judy Dev says, not really sure if it fits, but document your stuff. Yes. That's also super important. What did I just do? All right. Writing down what you learned in a blog or even in a journal will help you to remember what you had to do to solve a problem. Also super important. I mean, I've taken to writing down a lot of stuff in just personal notes and whatnot to remember what I did, but I really want to take that stuff and make real articles about it all, because I feel like you solve a problem for yourself, that's great. And if you write it down, that's even better, because you can recall that information. But if you can write it in a public place where people can find it, then other people can benefit from it too. So it serves everyone and not just you at that point. Ashra says, or even in your commit messages. Commit messages don't need to be a single line. Yeah, commit messages are a nice place to put information, though I don't go back looking at commit logs very often. I do write a lot in PR descriptions, though. Gunn is really trying to snipe me into saying Zettelkasten. Let's see. Ashra says, I just had a problem with a package the other day and found out that I actually contributed documentation to the issue within the package's documentation. Thanks, past me. Also, yes. Contribute documentation and fixes to the things you use. Very important. Purple G says, I don't know how to say or spell it, but that sounded excellent. I don't think so. I think I did it wrong. I always do it wrong. That's okay, though. Okay. Kusten. Yes. More stress on the first syllable. Yeah, Zettelkasten. That's right. Thank you. It's been a while since I talked about Org Rome, so I forgot how to pronounce that. All right. So the last thing, I can't remember who brought this up before. Choose, let's see, prefer open architectures, we could say. Over time, ARM and RISC-V machines will get better and better. It can be better to use these architectures because of openness, availability of open source drivers and firmwares, etc. I'm pretty excited about RISC-V. I think it's a really exciting area, but as someone in the chat mentioned, I don't know if it's Judy or someone else, basically said that it's not really there yet. But you know, I'm watching it because I want to see really open architectures like that succeed. It'd be nice if we could have like a really high quality laptop that was not built with super proprietary hardware. But yeah, it's going to require a lot of investment. And I think that part of that investment has to come from people like us who are willing to buy these early prototype style devices to try them out. Is it, God, what is it called? RISC-V? It's Rock something, right? Rock chips? Rock chips. Let's see. Is it? I don't know if it's that one. What's it called? See you, Emmanuel. Come on, go back. Felipe says the ISA is open, but the rest of the system will inevitably remain closed. Well, that's a possibility. Okay, Rock 5B. Yes, it's these things. Like, they're really cheap little devices. I think that Pine is probably making some stuff like this too. Whoa, is this the real site? Anyway. But, you know, like, actually buying stuff like this and experimenting with it incentivizes the people who make them to continue developing them and possibly move closer to having usable systems that you can do for more than just playing around or having like a small embedded system, I guess. Felipe says the amount of little hidden cores on these systems is mind-blowing. Is that a bad thing? Is that like a thing where you don't really understand what's happening in the system? You know, like for hosting your own software, your own services, having a little server built out of an ARM or RISC-V board could be a cool way to sort of do both things at once. But I don't really know how feasible that is at the moment. Ah, the Pine Tab V, the RISC-V tablet. That sounds cool. Haven't seen that one yet. All right. Yeah, we don't really know what's running there. It is a little concerning, I suppose. Okay, I think I'm gonna have to call it because I'm a little bit late now and I can hear my family having some trouble down there. I think my kid's getting a little bit too tired. Anyway, I think it was a pretty interesting discussion. Hopefully it was interesting for you too. I'm going to use this information as a way to sort of frame a lot of the content that I'm going to start making on the new System Crafters website. So it was very helpful to have everyone's feedback today and ideas on it. So thank you very much for collaborating with me on this. Also, if you have further thoughts about it, please feel free to leave comments on the video, send me an email, drop into the Matrix or IRC chat, let me know. Also, you can go to this repo, the System Crafters site repo on Codeberg. That's codeberg.org/systemcrafters/systemcrafters site. I'll put that link in the show notes, actually. And you can file an issue there if you want. I don't know. It's another way to log your suggestion. Codeberg. There we go. Cool. Yeah, and I'll probably have more to say about the website next week after I've had more time to sort of, flesh out a bit and make things work. But I'm looking forward to it. Should be cool. I'm looking forward to like the new phase of System Crafters and try to do things a bit more in a more organized fashion, let's say. So anyway, thank you all for being here today. I really appreciate it. Hope you all have a great weekend. Until next time, happy hacking. We'll see you.